Okay, so this is probably my least favorite thing to do is to quiet people down from learning, but it's time to hear the shir, and we had the schus over Shabbos to hear from Rabbi Zimmerman multiple times and enjoy every minute of it from Rabbi Zimmerman's tremendous breadth of knowledge and ni'imus and clarity in giving it over to us. So today, we are going to hear shir on the topic that we have been learning, and in Mitzvah Shem, as we said, this is going to be another shir similar to this next week, and I think Rabbi Zimmerman is also speaking on this topic, as the Rabbi mentioned on part 2 on Thursday night as well. So as we mentioned, the shir is Lili Nishvas Peretz Ben Alter Eliezer, as we mentioned earlier. And again, thank you all for coming, and we will love to hear from Rabbi Zimmerman at this time.
Rishus Roshei HaKollel, Chavrei HaKollel, Loimdei in the Kollel. Now Chazal tell us, Asei Teirasecha Kva Umelachtecha Aroi. Your Torah should be your primary occupation, and your work should be your secondary occupation. What does that mean? And the Rambam says, very, very simply, you have 12 hours extra in a day, because you have to sleep 8 hours. You have 12 hours in a day, and therefore you should work for 3 hours, and you should learn for 9 hours a day. And then your Teirascha will be Kva. However, in the modern era, we have a challenge. There aren't any jobs available that can support a family for 3 hours a day. As a matter of fact, if you know of one, let me know first. And as such, today we explain this by our state of mind. It might be the other way. We spend most of our time working, less time learning. But what does one consider one's primary occupation and accomplishment? Is it the Torah or is it the work? And we have to consider our Torah our primary occupation. But since it's just in the mind, how do you know if it's truly so that Torah is my primary occupation? Or I'm just fooling myself. I'm deceiving myself by thinking it's so, but it's not really so. I believe the answer is very simple. What do you do on a day off? When you have a day off, how do you spend that day off? Of course, everyone needs to relax, everyone needs to rest, everyone needs to spend time with their family. But do they dedicate extra time to learning on that day? If they do, then a person is showing that within their hearts, this is their primary occupation. This is what they really like to do. Just they're busy the rest of the time. If they don't, then it's not so. And therefore, when people gather together on a morning like this, and they spend a few hours in the Kollel, it's not merely the few hours that you're spending this morning. It's a statement about the entirety of your life. What is of paramount importance to you? Today's topic is confidentiality, the halachic and legal guidelines. And the Chafetz Chaim discusses confidentiality in 3 places. Number 1, look at page 7. He writes, this is in Lashon Hara Klal Tes Eisvav. Ha'omer lechaveroi ezer davar. You tell a friend something. Also loy l'saper achakach la'acherem. You mustn't repeat it to someone else. Elam kein nasan loy rishus hazeh. Unless you have permission to repeat it. So you need permission to repeat something. That's one place. Now turn to page 8. He says, because Rechilas Klal Ches Eis Hey, V'chayev Odom lahastir hasoyed. Person is obligated to keep confidential a secret. Hashi yigalo lo hachaverei derech seiser. Something was said in confidentiality. Alva pisha ein begilu yasoyed hu inyan rechilos. Even though there isn't any harm, nevertheless you have to keep it a secret. The third place the Chavetz Chaim discusses it, look at page 6. Im echad gilach chaverei v'apetosa inyan iskre mischare ki yoytiv zeh dvar mashe b'skama aser achakach legalis acher. You mustn't repeat something that's private about business. Pen yuchel agia lezeh hezek haitzar, because it will cause him harm or pain. There are 3 places the Chavetz Chaim says that you're not allowed to repeat something. These are 3 different halachas, as he writes himself in Ber Mayim Chaim. The first halacha, first in the order that we said them today, is a Gemara in Yuma, Daf Dalet Amud Beis, which is found on page 3. It says, Vayikra al Moshe vayedaber. A few lessons we learn from it. And finally, it says, Omer Rabba, Menayin lo oimer davar lechaver shehu bal yomer. How do you know if I tell something to someone, he must not repeat it? Ad she'yomer lecha emor. Until the person says you have permission to repeat it. She'nemar v'yidab Hashem elov ma'oil moyed leimar. What's the word leimar? Hashem said, I'm telling it to you, and you may repeat it. Must be that if you don't get permission to repeat it, you're not allowed to repeat it. Now what did Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Told him Torah. But nevertheless, you have no permission to repeat something unless you have unless there's explicit permission. The second Chavetz Chaim that we learned, which was on page 8, is based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is found on page 4. Tana Rabbana, Menayel Kishayetsu, when you leave a bezin, Lo Yomer. A dayan is not allowed to say, Hareini Mezake v'Chaveri Mechayvim. I really voted in your favor. It was the other dayanim who ruled against you. Aval ma eser shechaveri Rabbalai, but I was outvoted 2-1. Talmud loy v'loiselach rachel ba'mecha, v'oyme hoylach rachel megalasai. That is the source, the Chavetz Chaim says himself, on the second one that we learned, which was on page 8. The first one that says don't repeat something, the last thing that we learned, which is the first in the Chavetz Chaim on page 6, which we learned that don't repeat something that will cause someone damage, is found on page 1, Pasuk in Chumash. And the Chavetz Chaim explains as follows. The first halacha, which is don't repeat something unless you have permission, that is a midah tova. It's a correct and code of conduct. It's not a din, it's a midah tova. The second din, don't repeat something which is told to you as a secret, which is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin. That is a derabbanan. Pasuk says, the third thing we learned, which is don't repeat something that causes someone damage, that is a deraisa of V'seilach rachel b'mechel. The first thing is about any piece of information. The second thing is about a private piece of information. The third thing is about a piece of information which will cause harm or damage to someone else. So the Chavetz Chaim has 3 categories. things that it's not proper to repeat, things that you're not allowed to repeat with the Rabbanon, things you're not allowed to repeat with the rest. If you look in the Poskim and you look in the Marshal, he really says there are 4 categories. Because the first category, do not repeat something, if you don't have permission, can be divided into 2 also. There are certain things that people tell you. You meet someone on the street, they tell you a piece of information. It's not private, nor was the context that it was told to you private. Then you have something else. You have information which is not private. However, the context in which it's told to you, someone calls you into his office, locks the door and tells it to you. So although the information is rather mundane, but there's an expectation of privacy. The Marshal says, the Gemara that says, Menayin, if someone tells you something, you shouldn't repeat it. Hu b'bal yomer, which sounds like an isser, not just a midah taita. He's referring to the second thing. Why? Hashem called Moshe Rabbeinu into the Oil Moed. Why did he call him to the Oil Moed? He spoke to him in the middle of the street. Well, if he called him into the Oil Moed, then you need a lemar. But if Hashem would have told him on the street, then there wouldn't be an Isser Bal Yomer. So what is there? Yes, someone tells you information. So there's an Meiri that says that if someone tells you something, you shouldn't repeat it without permission, albeit it's not private, nor is there a context of an expectation of confidentiality. The pasuk says, "Hoylech Rachel Megala Sayf." What's the end of that pasuk? V'nemon ruach mechasa davar. A person who has a loyal spirit, a person who is discreet, remains discreet. And therefore, as such, there's really 4 madregas. There's a midah of discretion. Someone tells you something, don't repeat it. It's not an isser. That's what we call nemon ruach mechasa davar. Then there's something, someone tells you something which is not private, but it was said in a context which there's an expectation of not repeating it. That is the Gemara in Yuma, Val Taimar. Then there's something which is a secret, it is private. It doesn't cause harm if anyone knows about it, but people want to keep their own personal business private. That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Hoylech Rachel Megal Sayt. Finally, there's when someone tells you something which would cause the person harm. If you repeat it, that's the Issa Deraisa L'Seilach Rachel V'Amecha. Now it's interesting to note when you look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it says a Dayan Zal repeats something, Shenemar L'Seilach Rachel V'Amecha, which is a pasuk in Chumash, V'Omer Hoylech Rachel Megal L'Sayt, which is a pasuk in Mishli. The answer is, when a Dayan repeats something, sometimes it can cause a person harm. There's a financial dispute, there's a dispute about some invention or whatever. Sometimes it's just unpleasant that your personal details get revealed. And that's why the Gemara says, you're not allowed to do it, Shenemar L'Seilach Rachel. And then he says, well, even if it doesn't cause any harm, so the person's not a Rachel, but nevertheless it says, Hoylech Rachel Megal L'Sayt. This thing of the Is of Gili Sayt and Chuvas Maya, it says it's not only verbally, it could be written in written form also. It doesn't say the word of Dibur. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there was a certain Talmud who was told something privately, and 22 years later he repeated it, and they called him in the Beis Medrash Gal Yeraza. He's a revealer of secrets. He's not a discreet person. And what you see is there's no statute of limitations on keeping secrets. So we defined 4 categories. Someone tells you something. No, it's not private. It wasn't said in the context of privacy. Nevertheless, there is a midah of neman ruach al. Someone tells you something which is not private, but it's said in a context where it looks like there's an expectation of privacy. There, that's the Isra Bal Taimar, to repeat it without express permission. Next is if you know something which is private and the information itself, the person doesn't want it revealed, but it doesn't cause him any harm, that's Hailach Rachel Megalos Sayyid. It's a Drabana. And finally, if you repeat information which causes someone harm, that's an Issa Deraisa L'Seilach Rachel Hamecha. What about revealing your own secrets? A lot of things that people would rather kept private. But it's my secret, it's mine. I could say it. If you look in the Sefer of Pele Yayitz, from what's the Sefer? It has Pele Yayitz, good eitzes. He says, Lo yegala afilu seidis atzmai la'acher. Do not repeat your own secrets to someone. Shenema neman ruach machasadavar. He says, neman ruach machasadavar, you should be neman to yourself, not just to other people. Furthermore, it says, Vesatznuim chachma. Furthermore, he writes, Al tegalila oyavecho mash'ata mechasem eseinecha. Don't tell your friends what you don't want your enemies to know. He says, Yaakov Avinu spoke to Leah and Rachel out in the field. Never talk secrets in the house. You never know who's overhearing you. Shoyme pivel l'shoynai, shoyme mitzaras nafshay. And therefore, he says, the midah of discretion is not only a bein adam l'chaveirei, but you should know it's a bein adam la'atzmai. A discreet person doesn't disclose things unnecessary. Now, let's go further. Eavesdropping. Want to listen to someone's conversation. Whether, in the old-fashioned sense, it's called eavesdropping because there used to be eaves on houses. Cut in and still have them. And you can stand under the eave and listen to someone else's conversation. Today you can do it electronically, a lot easier. Now, it's a very not nice thing to do. But is it an isser to eavesdrop to someone's conversation? And the person can talk about it, and they say 4 possible sources that it's usser minadin to do so. In Chuvas Chikei Leiv, he says, V'hafta re'acha kamecha. You don't like it when people listen to your conversations, you shouldn't listen to other people's conversations. In the Sefer Halachas Ktanis, Chuvas Halachas Ktanis, he says, we learn it out from Loiseilach Rachel B'amecha. Loiseilach Rachel means don't go around like a gossip. He says there's no different being a gossip or comporting yourself like a gossip, whether you're trying to get gossip or you're revealing gossip. It's a Loiseilach Rachel B'amecha. The third category, which we have to know if such a category exists, is Hezek Shmiya. When you learn Baba Basra, you know there's something called Hezek Riya, and you have to put up a fence between neighbors, a wall. Good walls makes good neighbors. What about Shmiya? Even if I put up a wall, but I can listen to the conversations going in my neighbor's side of the yard. So the Meiri says, because Shmiya people could be nizar from. They'll talk quietly, they'll talk softly, they'll write things down. That's why Chazal only discuss a Hezek Riya and a Hezek Shmiya, because Hezek Shmiya, albeit it's usher, but you can protect yourself from. The Ramban in Bava Basra Daf Nun Tes says that what's wrong with Hezek Riya, or what's the damage? He says 1, Ayin Hara, 2, Lishna Bisha, 3, Tznius. The last 2 apply to Hezek Shmiya. However, in Chuvas Re'im, Siman Ches, he says that there's no such thing as Hezek Shmiya, and that's why he only says to put a wall, not a soundproof wall. So we have a machlekes in the Pesachim. Is there such a thing as Hezek Shmiya? According to those that there is something called Hezek Shmiya, eavesdropping constitutes Hezek Shmiya. In Chuvas Chikei Leiv, he says it's usher because of Gneva Stas. So therefore, eavesdropping has 4 potential isurim. After Yacha Kamecha, Leseilach Rachel B'amecha, Hezek Shmiya, and Gneva Stas. What's the difference between them?
If you're sitting in Spanish after Ma'ariv, and some guy 2 tables behind you is having a very private conversation, and he, for some reason, thinks that you can't hear so well, are you mechuyev to leave?
Okay, we'll discuss that. But what is the difference between the reasons? Can you eavesdrop on a conversation of a nachri? There's no v'hafta re'acha kamocha or le'seilach rachel ba'amecha on a guy, only on a yid. But the issa of hezek and the issa of bnei das applies to a guy. Don't see why not. Now it'll be mazik. See, now you have to be mazik. Next, Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. Came along Rabbeinu Gershom and said, do not read letters that one person sent another person. Why not? The answer is all the reasons we explained on eavesdropping. Chuvas Teres Chaim says also.
How did he hear the Rabbeinu Gershom?
That's what an answer. Now,
Why did he hear that? There's already served.
two people asked. Now, there's another issa. When you pick up someone's letter, so the question was asked, why did Rabbeinu Gershom have to make a cherem on something which is plain usher? We know Rabbeinu Gershom shouldn't marry two wives. Okay. That's something that he created, invented. But why would he make a cherem on something which is plain usher? And the truth is, if you look in Chuvas Noid Yehuda Eben Ezra Chelik Aleph Sim Ein Hein Ein Zayin, Chuvas Van Seifer Eben Ezra Sim Gimel, that there are really two types of cherem Rabbeinu Gershons. There are certain things that Rabbeinu Gershon instituted and he invented. He came up with certain ideas for a tikkun olam, don't marry two wives, don't divorce Bal Karachach, whatever it is. There are other things that were already usher. He saw people were lax in it, and he was mechazek it with a cherem. Zot the Noid in some sefer. The first type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershon, which is the ones we're most accustomed to, those are the Rabbanans. Rabbeinu Gershon made an isser. Rabbeinu Gershon, as great as he was, can't make an isser deraisa. He says the second type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershon, where something was already usher. So he was mechazik it by putting you in cherem. Well, that's a deraisa of Gedorim. And therefore the second type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershon is more chamer than the first type of Rabbeinu Gershon. Now, although the cherem was on everything we discussed before, however, the words of the cherem were on a letter, on something which is written. Written could be a letter. We say a letter, but it's anything written. It could be personal documents. It could be a fax. It could be information on a computer. Eavesdropping, as bad as it is not included in Cherem Rabbeinu Gershon. Now, some people write on the outside of a letter, Pagin Targama. Peretz Geder Yitzchenu Nachash, Cherem Rabbeinu Gershon. Which means don't read it. Why do you have to write it? First of all, it has to be usher for many reasons. And further, Rabbeinu Gershon made a cherem. So there is a Shul to Gebarim in Shuas that says that if you want to activate the cherem, you have to write these words. Halacha Ktanas Chikkelei, you say there's no such thing. He made a cherem, and that cherem goes no matter what. In the Knesset Kollel, he says that Rabbeinu Gershon did two things. He made an Isser and a Cherem. The Isser is regardless, for the Cherem you have to activate. What happens? You walk down the street and you find a letter. This letter is open. It's thrown out, discarded. Can you pick it up and read it? So in Chuvas Meram Rottenberg, he says yes. Obviously, the recipient of the letter has no problem with you reading it because he tossed it out on the street. In Chuvas Halachas Ktanas and Chikkelei says, but how do you know that the sender isn't makbid? Now, this is l'chayra machlekes. It's Cherem Rabbeinu Gershon. If someone receives a letter and he wants to show it to me, am I allowed to read it? According to Meram Rottenberg, yes. According to the Halachas Ktanas and the Chikkelei, you're not allowed to send it because you're not allowed to show it to someone because the sender might be makbid. Where did they get this idea from? You'll ask everyone, the pashtus is, it's totally in the recipient. And the recipient can share information with everyone they want. Where did they get this idea that it's usher?
You see their one Hashem's lemma. He gave him permission.
Okay, but that's not an isser. That's my Chaim says it's a midah taita. So they prove it from Malachim, Pasuk in Malachim. David HaMelech, as he's about to die, tells Shlomo HaMelech, "V'gam ata yadata es asher asur li Yoav ben Tzruya." You know what Yoav did to me, and make sure he doesn't have a pleasant ending. What is it that Yoav did to him? Zok Rashi, Shehera hasefer sheshalach David b'yad Uriah. David HaMelech sent a letter with Uriah to Yoav, which told Yoav, take Uriah and put him on the front. Right? This will die and he'll be able to marry Bathsheba. Yoav showed it to Uriah. Back to Kollel, what was the avlu? It was his letter. He's the recipient. The recipient is allowed to show it to someone. So they say, Vais dois, that you're not allowed to. If the sender didn't want you, and David HaMelech surely didn't want him to send it, you're not allowed to show it.
Why is that rechilas?
I didn't say shechilus.
I'm asking what's
Which isser is it? All of the ones I'll eavesdropping. Halachas Tanis.
That applies to even saving a life.
Okay, I'm saying let's isolate this. Halachas Tanis asks the question: what if Uriah is delivering the letter to Yoav? What should he have done? He says, not supposed to read it for the reasons behind Chen Ben Gesh. To give it back to David HaMelech, don't want to deliver it, he'll send it to another delivery person. So what should he have done? He said he should have ripped it up. Because ripping it up to protect yourself would be mutter. You just had no right to read it. Anyway, that having been said, there is a machlokes. Does Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom apply when the recipient is happy to share it and the sender is not? Now, the most obvious contemporary application of this is pushing the forward button on an email. You get an email, and the easiest thing in the world, and people do it many times a day, it's interesting, they forward it. Why? I want to share it. The question is, did the sender want to share it also? Now, of course, if it caused damage to the sender, that's already going to be rechilas. But even if it doesn't cause any damage, is it included in Cherem Ben Gershom? This is this machlokes. What about you want to show it to your family? Someone sends you an email, a letter, and you'd like to show it to your family. Is that also included in Cherem Ben Gershom? So in the Sefer Das Kedoshim in Siman Shin Lamed Dalet, which is a very interesting novel thought, he says the halacha is if someone gives you something to watch, you can give it to your wife and children, or your parents for that matter, to watch. It's kol ha'mafkid al das ishtei abanov mafkidim. If someone sends you a letter, they know that it's going to be shown to your family. However, even this probably has a limitation, depending on the contents of the letter, will it cause damage. So to review what we've said so far, there's a concept from the Pele Yayetz of discretion. Don't repeat your own private information. There's next, a midah tova of neman ruach machasa davar. Someone tells you something, don't repeat it. There's next, that if a person tells you something and the context shows an expectation of privacy, you need explicit permission to repeat it. That's a Gemara in Yuma of Bal Yomar. Next, someone tells you something, or you have knowledge of something which a person wants to remain private, albeit it causes the person no damage. That is an isser of a derabanan of Hilach Rachel Megalah Say. Not to repeat something which would cause someone harm. That is an isser deraisa of L'Seilach Rachel Amecha. Eavesdropping would include after Acha Kamecha Rechilus Knei V'Stas Hezek Shmiya. Cherem Ben Gershom includes all of the above. Now let's take some examples. One's own secrets, Peliyah says, are not revealed. That's seemingly self-explanatory. The Gemara in Bava Metzia says, Talmud Chacham is mutar l'shanais b'shloisha dvar. Talmud Chacham is allowed to deceive in three things. Ba'orcha, b'mesachta, b'poria. Ba'orcha means if someone hosted you very graciously, you shouldn't repeat it, even if you're asked, because it might cause someone damage. Mesachta is, someone asks you, do you know this? That's another. When my son was 9 years old, my oldest son, it's a bit of a phenomenon, and he memorized all of Bava Metzia. And I took him to my yeshiva at Shul Burma, so we did take him up ahead. So the first question the yeshiva asks him is, you can't Pesachas Bava Metzia? Do you know Bava Metzia? Son doesn't answer. He says, you can't Bava Metzia? Doesn't answer. So the yeshiva tells him, you came here for Fahed, do you know Bava Metzia? Doesn't answer. He tells me, I can know Metzia. Because it says on Daf Chav Gimel that a Talmud Chacham mutar l'shanais b'mesachta. Then you have Bepuria. Bepuria literally means matters of personal privacy, personal intimacy and privacy. There's a sefer called Titan Emes Liyacher about when you're supposed to say the emes and when you're allowed to prevaricate. And he says, he asked the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Abel Yashuv questioning. Someone comes to your door and wants to speak to you. So if he's a polite person, you can send someone to say he's not available. There are some people who don't take no for an answer. And unless you explain to them what you are doing, and in their eyes it's more important than what they want, they're not going to take no for an answer. Are you mechuyev? And you are doing something important. Are you mechuyev to explain it? And he says there that both of Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashu said, you can tell the person to go to the door and say, he's not home. Why? Because Talmud Chacham mutar l'shanais b'puria, privacy doesn't mean pure privacy matters. Anything you're not obligated to disclose your personal business to other people. Of course, you have to be very careful when your kid goes to those that my father said he's not home. But nevertheless, you should know that that is mutar. Okay, it's a story when I moved to Gates. So the second day I was there, it's quite jet lagged. And sure enough, Rabbi Falk came to visit. And I was sleeping. So I knocked on the door, my wife opened up, and they want to visit the Rav, and my wife said he's napping. So he told her, don't ever say the Rav is napping. You say that he's preparing the share. So my wife said, but he's not preparing the share. She said, first of all, how does your husband prepare the share? He's rested. The information's in his head. No, you have to be rested to put it together. That's how he prepares share. So first of all, it's not a lie. Second of all, you're not mechuyev to go tell people what your husband is doing. Well, at that time it was interesting. Later in Achach L'das, it says in Chuvas Melamed L'Hayil, Shetziva L'Ishtay, whenever he went to take a rest, he told his wife, tell everyone I'm preparing a share. That is, you're not mechuyev to disclose personal information, although it's not top secret. Next, someone tells you something, don't repeat it. That's going to be the Tevet. Someone tells you something in a context of expectation of privacy, like Moshe Rabbeinu, that's an Isabel Tevet. Someone tells you something private, give an example, someone tells you about a shidduch. You know, my son is going out with so-and-so and it looks serious. The next person comes and says, tell me, you know what's doing by so-and-so thing? Is his son going out? Is the shidduch serious? In the Sefer Titan Emes Liyacher, it says, both of Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashuv said you could say Eini Yedeya. Because, like we say, Bepuria means people are allowed to maintain privacy. This halacha that Dvar Seiser, even though it doesn't cause harm, which is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Gemara in Sanhedrin says it about a Bezdin. The Pesach Sanhedrin is talking about a Bezdin. The Pasuk in Mishlei has nothing to do with a Bezdin. Hoylech Rachel Megala Said is about an expectation of privacy. In Chuvas Marnach, it says this is true not only about a Dayan, but anyone who's appointed by the Tzibur to deal with Tzarchei Tzibur, there's an expectation of privacy, and he has an issue to repeat what went on in a board meeting of a shul. You're not allowed to repeat it. In Chuvas Marnach Siman Kuf Yud Aleph says V'ha'oisa came. Someone's a mamuna ala Tzibur, and he repeats what happened. Possibly manus mutuvayir. He's disqualified from serving the community. When Englander asked, what happens in your shul and you overhear you overhear people talking, what should you do? You should know. The Sefer Chassidim already discussed it. Sefer Chassidim says if they're talking something private in Beis Medrash and you're overhearing it, Yelech lebeisav yispalol levad. Go home and daven yechidus, even if you miss a minyan.
He would talk during davening.
Obviously, they were talking even in the middle of davening, or it could be they were having a meeting in the ladies' shul, and you're davening in the men's shul, but you happen to overhear. So that's Sefer Chassidim. Go home.
How was Mordechai when this the big son served?
So might address it, but they were going at least. So there was no after Kamosh, and they said a Rachel Bamel.
There's no Bapit Klasa on Sikkim?
No. Now, that was the first time we read on page 6. What about this te'elis? We know in Hilchos Lashon Hara, you're allowed to say Lashon Hara when it's a te'elis for someone. Are you allowed to repeat secrets with te'elis? And Nissen Karelitz writes in Chut Hashani that he once did a Din Torah on a divorce case. And then one of the people, someone asked about shidduch information about one of the people, one of the litigants in the Din Torah, and it so happened to be that this is the person who was totally blameless. And therefore, he was thinking, can I repeat? Although there's an expectation of privacy in the Bezdin, but here it's mamish l'telis. Look, you can ask permission, but is this l'telis mutter? So he went to ask his uncle, the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish said that te'elis is a heta in Lashon Hara, but not in Gili Said, because he still were Megala Said. Ad kan ha-sipur. And he says he wonders, what's the difference? I believe the answer is very pashut, and it's included in the words of the Chazon Ish. The reason why Lashon Hara is mutter l'te'elis is because it's not Lashon Hara anymore. Lashon Hara is negative talk, harmful talk, and when there is a te'elis, it's not harmful anymore. It's not Lashon Hara, it's Lashon Tov. As a matter of fact, the Chavetz Chaim writes in Hagah in Hilchos Lashon Hara, Klal Yud, Halacha Yudalid in Hagah, that if a person has a need to vent, normally we say te'elis, I tell Lashon Hara te'elis because the Shemeya needs to know about it. What happens if I have absolutely no interest in it, and the person wants to vent to me and he has a need to talk? Shteit in Chavetz Chaim, that's also called the te'elis. Te'elis doesn't have to be for the Shemeya, the te'elis can be for the Medaber. He says, how do I know such a thing? The Pasuk, the Agabalavish, Yesikana. I have a worry. Talk to someone else. You think someone really cares about my worry? It's just healthy to talk. And therefore it's a te'elis.
But what if that Maz is the person that they're talking about?
No, that we're not talking about. Just too much off the topic for the moment. But it's called the te'elis. Rechilus, if it's a te'elis, it's still rechilus. Gili soy, that's what the Chazon Ish said. That even if it's te'elis, it's still gili soid. You're not taking away the fact that you're being megala aside, and there's no such. It's not a asay deichalais asay in te'elis. That te'elis overrides anything. It's just te'elis makes it eis lashon hara. When it comes to rechilus, and here we're only talking about the derabbanan rechilus, because in the Bezdin, nevertheless, it doesn't override. Now you have a question. I have personal information. And it was told to me with a expectation of privacy and revealing it will cause actual harm to the person. That's an issa d'oraisa l'seilach rachel v'amach. However, if I don't reveal it, I'm causing harm to someone else. Am I allowed to reveal it? Let's give some examples. You're a doctor, and you know that a person has serious illness, and he's meeting someone for shidduchim, and he's not repeating it. Are you allowed to repeat it? Talking about the halacha first. You're a doctor, and you know a person is losing their eyesight, and they're still driving, They have a contagious disease, and they're walking around. You're causing spiritual harm to other people. But I know this as a secret, told in the context of a secret, which is private, which will cause someone else harm. What am I supposed to do? You look at page 1. Page 1 it says, Loiseilach rachel b'amecha. Then the end of the pasuk is, Loisamoid al dam re'echa. What?
I would just store my clothes.
Well, my chazal tells you to do nothing. Oh. So, Loisamoid al dam re'echa. Loisamoid al dam re'echa is you have to prevent people from harm, from drowning, from even financial loss. Why are these two in the same pasuk? In Chumash, things go together. These are two separate isurim. There's one, don't be a gossip, and number 2, if someone's drowning, save them. Zaktin Netziv in Hamek Tevet, I think it's in page 2, at the end. V'oid nichlal b'smichas azaris helu, she'af al gav, she'zarta le'seilach rachel, even though you were commanded le'seilach rachel, v'chol mokan le'samed al dam re'echa. The Torah qualifies le'seilach rachel v'amecha le'samed al dam re'echa, that if you know that someone's going to harm someone else, you're mechuyev to do it. But also lamed al dam re'echa. The tzmichas of the Torah is to teach you that le'seilach rachel v'amecha has an override called le'samed al dam re'echa. That's how that's it learned Chumash. If you look in the Piskei Tshuva on Arachaim Kuf Nun Vav, it's a separate sefer, this Piskei Tshuva, and he says as follows: Kol ha'olam mar'ishim al le'seilach rachel. The whole world screams about le'seilach rachel, all types of Lashon Hara campaigns and Lashon Hara chizuk. V'ani marish al le'samed al dam re'echa. I would like to scream a bit about people who don't reveal information. Shlomo Kluger's daughter seemingly fell in terribly in the shidduch, and he wrote a whole sefer about the rishus of the people who didn't tell him what they all knew when they knew that his daughter was going out. So what we see is that when there's a loisamed al dam re'echa, this overrides loiseilach rachel v'amecha. Not only does it override, but you're mechuyev to do so. The question is, if you look in Shari Tshuva Rabbeinu Yoina Klal Gimel Reish Chaf Aleph, it says you're allowed to repeat it because loisamed al dam re'echa. So Shlomo Zalman asks, what do you mean you're allowed to repeat it? Well, you have to repeat it. So in Jewish Tzitz Eliezer says, Rabbeinu has to tell you you're allowed to repeat it. Once you're allowed to, then you're mechuyev to. That's obvious. The question is, who said that you're allowed to in the first place?
The Rav's examples prefer l'samen should be on both ways.
What do you
If
mean?
I tell people that I'm going to harm the doctor,
We're talking the doctor as the shayla. The doctor knows that someone is legally blind and he's driving. So if he repeats it, the guy's going to go to jail. And if he doesn't repeat it, then this person's going to knock over people. So that is l'samed al dam re'echa.
In the case of the shidduch example, you could lose the license for revealing that information. So
We know that. We'll discuss the conflicts, but first we're teaching halacha. And as a matter of fact, just on the topic of shidduchim itself, which is a topic on its own, we're going to have a share here in the Kollel Thursday night at 9:15, which information should be disclosed and which one not. But halachically, you're mechuyev to disclose it. Of course, one needs to exercise judgment. When is it le'seilach rachel v'amecha, and when is it le'samed al dam re'echa? But nevertheless, you should know that there is a tension between the two. There's another question. If you're a doctor, there's something called the Hippocratic Oath, which you swear, or used to do it at least, to swear to confidentiality. So l'chayra, dal mahacha, le'seilach rachel v'amecha, if you're going to repeat information that protects people, you're going to be over Shua's Sheker. And the answer might be, you will look in page 5. The Ramah says, Yesh Ayram da Nishba Shaloi Legalis L'Chaveira Yitgava Shiyaks Lenu Min HaHefzer Have a Nishba Levatel Mitzvah Ve'enai Chal. You can't swear to not to repeat things because then that's a shua against the Torah. And therefore, the shua is not chal. Rabbi Yashiv says it's not so pashut because here you made the shua before you got the information. Furthermore, it's a kollel because you kollel all information with this specific information. So he says you should do hataras nadara. Tzitz Eliezer says, I never meant it. And that's how they
Isn't the understanding of the shvuah for the future though?
What?
Isn't the understanding of that shvuah for the future? So how can it be that at the time it was going on the past?
It wasn't going on the past. It didn't say it's going on the past.
So what was Rabbi Yashiv?
Rabbi Yashiv was saying that the case of the Ramah is that when I swore, I knew it was information that will harm people. As opposed to here, when I swore, I meant it for the future.
When a doctor has a responsibility to report something about his patient,
Right.
a legal situation,
Right.
the person that went to the doctor knew beforehand that he's going to say to the answer.
Okay. So, first we want to establish that the Samad Amre'echa overrides the Seilat Rachel. Now, I just want to point out something. If you're going to become a doctor, or a therapist, or the like, there are civil laws of maintaining confidentiality, unless there's harm, and the halacha clause. It so happens to be that the definition of harm in halacha and the definition of harm in civil law are two totally different things. In civil law, it means suicide or homicide. In halacha, it can mean any damage, a shidduch. No such thing in civil law that you can reveal something confidential because of a shidduch. Or even financial loss, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah says is leisamed al adam re'echa. What happens if it's spiritual harm? One person is causing someone else spiritual harm. It was told to you in privacy. In halacha, you're allowed to repeat it. In civil law, you're not allowed to. Remember, there's a famous lawsuit in New York State where a woman revealed to Rabbanim that she doesn't keep taras hamishpacha. And they went and told the husband, and she went and sued them for violating the clergyman penitent confidentiality rule. Now the judge must have been Jewish because his ruling was, one, that she told the two rabbanim at the same time, not one, so there's no expectation of confidentiality. But the second one was a chiddush. He said that the client, the priest, the penitent confidentiality is to prevent the priest from being compelled to testify in court against his client. But there is no law, expectation between the client and the priest. Like they must have been the Yid to come up with such a chiddush in such a manner which is totally ruchnius and not physical harm. So don't try it in Florida, or maybe you could, but don't try it in Washington D.C. at least, because you're not going to win a case on that. But you have to know that when you get into a situation such as this, and any other professions helping people, you're going to have a conflict between the two. And think about it in advance, what you're going to do. Some people deal with from people, sign a contract with them that anything that I'm halachically obligated to reveal as decided by so-and-so, I'm going to reveal, then you don't have an expectation. Sometimes you can't do that. But, as they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You're going to find yourself in a lot of hot water. If it'll be Torah, you're going to have to do one thing, and by civil law or based on your licensing board, you might have to do something else and you're going to get yourself a lot of trouble, and you're going to need a lot of ingenuity to get yourself out of it. Chazon Ish told them this in Karadas: when people ask you anything, before you say anything, you should say, I'm a dayan and I don't talk about people. I can't reveal anything. The sod miktsai. It's a professional secret. That was his advice. And you should know, if you treat people, you can, first of all, generally, if you treat people, you shouldn't even acknowledge that you have a patient, or that person's your patient. More so, you get yourself in a lot of trouble that when you give information about someone, you give information about someone when it's positive, but when it's negative, you say, well, I'm not allowed to talk. So that itself is negative, and that itself is Lashon Hara. The only thing to do is, if you're in one of the professions which have an expectation of confidentiality, you have to say in advance, I'm a doctor, I don't give shidduch information. Is that person a patient of yours? No, I just don't, because that's the only way to fulfill it. Very briefly, because it's getting late. What about, you want to protect a secret which you told someone? So in civil law, you sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. Are these agreements valid in Halacha? So one, you have a no disclosure contract. The Yid obligates themselves not to disclose. The contract in Halacha won't be valid because this is called a kinyan dvarim. A kinyan can only work on effectuating a transaction. You can't have a kinyan to do something. What about a hischayvus? A hischayvus with a shibud aguf can work on a kinyan, on something which is a kinyan dvarim. I can be mischay myself to give you a present with a shibud. So will this work? I'll mischay myself with a shibud not to disclose. The answer is machlokes and Sivas HaMishpach and Divrei Chaim. Can there be a hischayvus on a negative, on not doing something? Can you have a hischayvus to do something? Can you have a hischayvus not to do something? So the next thing is to make a hischayvus with a knas. I won't disclose it, and if I do disclose it, I'm going to pay you X. There you have a kinyan on momen. You still have a problem of asmach v'loikanya. If you write ma'achshav, if I disclose it, I will hereby pay you X, Y, Z, and I'm mechuyev from now. According to the Mechaber, you took away the problem of asmachta. According to the Ramah, even if you said ma'achshav, and even if it's biyadcha, if the penalty is exaggerated, that's also called an asmachta. And the Ramah says, if you say im oyver v'loy avid, if a worker says, if I won't work, shalom b'meitav works. Shalom el zuz, it doesn't work according to Ramah. So how would you make a non-disclosure agreement that should be valid in Halacha? And the only answer is the same way you'd make a shtar for Yerushas Habanis. The person will make a schayvus, I hereby obligate myself, me'achshav u'bebezin choshev, right now, for a penalty, and that penalty could be whatever it is, $10 million, on the t'nai, but if I don't disclose it, you're meichel l'chayv. That is the only way that it will be halachically valid. This is also true about non-compete clauses. Non-compete clauses, at least in England, don't usually stand up even in a civil court because they're not fair, and something called the fairness doctrine. But even if it would stand up in civil court, it's not going to stand up in a bezdin. The only way it will stand up in a bezdin, if it's a schayvus ma'achshav, an unconditional, a debt which is schayvus from now, based on a condition which the non-disclosure is the t'nai. This is the only way to do it halachically. This is a basic outline of the laws of confidentiality in halacha. Just maybe end with the Faragada. Heard before Elbam talking about why was the Churban Shloi Birchu B'Torah Tchil. And he asked, because it didn't say Birchu Torah, it's only Masei. That's why you have a Churban. And he gave a beautiful answer. There's a more fundamental question. who learns without making a Birchas HaTorah? I know many people make Birchas HaTorah and don't learn. My whole life I've never met anyone who learns without Birchas HaTorah. Now we know the Ran brings a Teretz Rabbeinu Yaina, and some Sefer says the name, but I've never met anyone with who doesn't say Birchas HaTorah, learns without Birchas HaTorah. The truth is, if you're medayik in the Gemara says, Shloi birchu b'Torah tchila. Sounds like they did make Birchas HaTorah. They just didn't say it before they started learning. They said it in the middle of learning. That's even more perplexing. Because who learns and makes Birchas HaTorah but doesn't make it before you learn? What's the problem with the Gemara? The Gemara earlier says, why is it that Talmidei Chachamim who have children are not Talmidei Chachamim? Shloi baruch b'Torah tchila. Shein mevarach b'Torah tchila? Even more perplexing. We're talking about people that the Gemara calls Talmidei Chachamim. I want to relate to you a thought. There are two types of brachas: Birchas HaMitzvos and Birchas HaNehenen. Birchas HaMitzvos are said before you do the mitzvah, because Kol HaBrachos Mevarchim Aleim Oiver L'Asiyasa. What happens in the middle of the mitzvah? You can make a bracha also. Oiver L'Asiyasa is just a tefillah. According to Ramon Shchit, you can even make a bracha afterwards. Birchas HaNehenen you have to make beforehand, because Asur Lahanas Mo'edim Hazeh L'Oi Bracha. What is our learning? Our Birchas HaTorah, of course everyone makes Birchas HaTorah. But is our Birchas HaTorah a Birchas HaMitzvos, or is it a Birchas HaNehenen? Nafkamina is, can you make it in the middle of learning? That Chazal. The person learns, he's a Talmud Chacham. Aber sein Bracha is a Birchas HaMitzvos, you can't transmit it to the next generation. It's a sense of obligation, it's a burden, you can't give it over to other people. Only if it's a Birchas HaNehenen that you have to say in advance, that's when you can transmit it. Alma of the Haaretz. After the Churban Beis Rishon, no one understood why. What happened? Shalom Nevi'im V'loi Pershua, Shalom L'Zakenim V'loi Pershua, Shalom L'Bachsas V'Malachi Ashoris V'loi Pershua. No one was able to discern what was the sin. They were perfect. Once heard of Shach, was on the beach of Netanya in 1983. They said, if the Malachim and the Zakenim and the Nevi'im don't know, so what do you expect from people? And Shach said, Weisleis a Mensch darf sich kennen besser wie a Navi. To understand someone else you have to be a Navi. To understand yourself you should know what's going on with. And they didn't understand, it was so subtle. And Avada they learned, and Avada they made Birchas HaTorah. And therefore, Al Ma'av the Oretz. So the Eibishter said, Al Ozron es Tairasi, that you have forsaken my Torah. What does it mean, forsaken Torah? Shaloi birchu b'Torah tchila, Avada they learned, and Avada they said Birchas HaTorah. But their Birchas HaTorah was a Birchas HaMitzvos. It wasn't a Birchas HaNehenen. And if your Torah is not a Birchas HaNehenen, that's Ozron es Tairasi. That's called forsaking Torah. The essence of Torah, V'harav ma Hashem Elokeinu, is Divrei Zirascha B'finu. Make the Torah sweet, and then the Miyah Nachnu Tzeitzayim Tzeitzayim Chabeis Yisrael V'lanu Yedish Shemecha. Only then can it transmit. Only then can we merit true kedusha.
Nice to meet the person is not a professional. He points out about a buzz. I tell somebody, don't tell me private information because I'm an open book. I tell people.